Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me from where and what time you're watching? Thanks. The storm that night wasn't the kind you admire from a cozy window with a mug of cocoa. It was relentless, loud, and suffocating. I was 16, sitting by my bedroom window, watching the pine trees in our backyard bend and sway under the weight of the wind. The whole house felt unusually quiet, except for the heavy thuds of my dad's boots on the floorboards below. He'd been pacing all evening, tuning in and out of the radio, muttering about how storms like this brought out the worst. I didn't really get what he meant. Not yet, anyway. Our little town wasn't the kind of place where much happened. Nestled up against the edge of the forest, it felt timeless, frozen in its own quiet rhythms. But there was one person in town who always seemed to stand just outside those rhythms, Miss Eliza. She lived in a small cabin just beyond the tree line, close enough to be part of the town, but distant enough that she never really was. She was kind, in her own reserved way. The kind of person who'd bandage a stray dog's paw or offer nettle tea when someone came down with a nasty cold. But she wasn't chatty, and people didn't often visit unless they had a reason. Some folks called her a healer. Others whispered about her being a witch. For me, though, she was just Miss Eliza, the one who showed me how to read the snow. Snow remembers, she'd told me once. Her voice was calm and sure. It'll tell you where someone's been, where they're going. But it hides things too when it wants to. At the time, I thought it was one of those mysterious things adults say to sound wise. I never expected it to mean anything, but I thought about it a lot that night, when the storm swallowed the town and she disappeared. The knock at our door came just after dark. My dad opened it cautiously. His hand gripped the latch like he was bracing for bad news. It was Mr. Caro, the guy who owned the general store. He was bundled in a thick coat. His face was pale and pinched from the cold. "It's Eliza," he blurted, his breath fogged in the icy air. "She's gone." "Gone?" my dad asked. His voice was sharp. Caro nodded, shivering. "Her chimney stopped smoking hours ago. I went to check and, well, she wasn't there. And there's blood on the snow." That last part made the hairs on my neck stand up. I was halfway down the stairs before my dad turned and snapped, "You stay here." Of course I didn't listen. I grabbed my coat, boots, and a flashlight and followed the small group of men who'd gathered to search. The storm hit us full force as soon as we stepped outside. The wind stung my face and turned my breath into clouds. The snow was so deep it swallowed our boots, making every step an effort. Eliza's cabin came into view like a shadow emerging from the storm. Normally it had a warm, welcoming look. Smoke curled from the chimney, light glowed from the windows. That night it was dark and lifeless. The front door swung open on its hinges. Snow had blown inside, covering the floor in drifts. We filed in. My dad led the way. "Eliza?" he called. His voice echoed in the silence. No answer. The cabin was a mess. A table was overturned. A chair was broken. Shards of a teacup glittered on the floor near the cold hearth. It was the tracks outside, though, that froze everyone in place. 2 sets of footprints led away from the cabin. One set was small, like hers. The other wasn't. The larger prints were deep and uneven, with long drag marks in between. Every few feet, there were dark smears in the snow. Blood. I glanced at my dad. His jaw was clenched. His eyes were fixed on the tracks. Without a word, he motioned for everyone to follow. The woods were eerily quiet, except for the crunch of our boots and the occasional snap of a branch weighed down by ice. I tried to focus on the beam of my flashlight, on the tracks in the snow, anything to keep my mind from spiraling. But there was something about the air that felt wrong. Thick, heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. We found her at the base of an old pine tree, half buried in snow. She was sitting against the trunk, her face tilted up toward the sky. Snowflakes had settled on her hair and lashes, making her look almost peaceful. But the blood on her coat told a different story. "Eliza," my dad whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. He shook her gently, then more urgently, but she didn't move. I stayed back, unable to take another step. That's when I saw it. Behind the tree, just beyond the reach of our flashlights, was a shape. At first, I thought it was an animal, a bear maybe, but it was too still, too twisted. Its eyes caught the light, reflecting back a dull, lifeless glow. It wasn't natural. It moved then, a slow, deliberate shift that sent a jolt of panic through my chest. My breath caught. Before I could even think, I screamed. Whatever it was disappeared into the storm, its heavy steps fading into the wind. No one followed it. No one dared. The coroner later said it was hypothermia, that she'd wandered out in the storm and collapsed. But the men who'd been there knew better. They'd seen the slashes on her coat, the strange tracks in the snow. None of them talked about it, though. Not openly. After Eliza was buried, the town grew quieter. People bolted their doors during storms. They told their kids not to stray too far from home. I was 11 when Christmas lost its magic for me. That was the year my little brother Danny disappeared during a snowstorm. Our neighborhood wasn't the kind of place you'd see in a holiday movie. No cheerful decorations, no happy carolers. Just rows of gray houses and chain-link fences under heavy, dull skies. Winters were brutal, and that year the snow came down like it had a grudge. Danny was only 5, full of energy and questions. He believed in magic like it was as real as the cold air biting at your cheeks. One night, as the wind whipped against our windows, he whispered to me, "If I ask Santa, he can fix everything. Mom won't cry anymore. Maybe Dad will come back." Hearing him say that, it was like a punch to the gut. But what could I say? He was 5. I just nodded and told him maybe he was right. So when the snow started falling and he begged to go see Santa at the Belridge Mall, I gave in. We bundled up, puffy coats, scarves, the works, and trudged through the snow. The world was already turning white, and every step felt heavier than the last. By the time we reached the mall, my face was stinging from the cold. My boots were soaked through. The mall wasn't any better. Half the lights were out. The Christmas decorations looked like they'd been dragged out of storage as an afterthought. There wasn't a soul around except for a few bored employees and Santa, slumped on his sad little stage near the food court. Santa didn't exactly inspire confidence. His suit was faded. His beard had this weird yellowish tint, and his eyes, something about his eyes wasn't right. They weren't twinkly or kind like you'd expect. They were sharp, like he was sizing up everyone who walked by. But Danny didn't notice. He lit up like a Christmas tree and sprinted to Santa's stage, completely ignoring my warnings to slow down. I hung back, something in my gut telling me to keep my distance, but I stayed close enough to watch. Santa's voice was low and gravelly, like the sound of boots crunching on icy pavement. "What do you want for Christmas?" he asked Danny. Danny didn't ask for toys or games like most kids. He wanted wishes. For Mom to stop crying, for Dad to come home, for me to stop being mad all the time. Listening to him, I felt this tight knot in my chest. He was so small, so hopeful. I didn't have the heart to tell him some wishes don't come true. Santa listened, tilting his head like he understood. Then he leaned in close and whispered something to Danny. I couldn't hear what he said, but Danny's face changed. He looked excited, but also a little scared, like he'd been told a big, important secret. When Danny climbed down, Santa's gaze shifted to me. His smile stretched too wide, and his eyes locked onto mine like he was trying to tell me something without speaking. "Take care of your brother." His voice was calm but deliberate, like a warning. We left the mall. The snow was coming down hard now, thick and blinding. Danny held a small box in his hands, wrapped in shiny red paper with a silver bow. "What's that?" I asked. Santa said not to open it yet. He replied, clutching it like it was the most important thing in the world. That night, the storm slammed against the house, shaking the windows and burying everything outside. Danny wouldn't go to bed. He sat by the window, staring out into the white blur, holding the box like he was waiting for something. "Come on, Danny," I said, but he didn't budge. "Santa's coming back," he whispered. I didn't sleep much. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I heard it. 3 soft knocks at the front door. Tap, tap, tap. My stomach sank. I ran to Danny's room, but he wasn't there. His bed was empty, and the window was open wide, snow blowing in and covering the floor. I threw on my boots and coat, barely stopping to think, and rushed outside. The wind was vicious, cutting into my skin as I yelled his name over and over. The snow swallowed my voice, and my legs felt like lead. I searched until I couldn't feel my fingers, but there was no sign of him. When the storm let up the next morning, the police came. They asked their questions, combed the neighborhood, but found nothing. No tracks, no clues. Just the little box Danny had been holding, sitting in the snow beneath his window. I opened it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Inside was a snow globe, the glass foggy and cold. Inside was a tiny version of our house, perfectly detailed, down to the little tree in the yard. When I shook it, the snow swirled around. For a second, I thought I saw movement, A tiny figure in red, walking between the trees. I threw the snow globe in the trash, but it didn't matter. That night, just as I was dozing off in Danny's room, I heard it again. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. I froze. My chest felt tight and I couldn't move. Peeking through the curtain, I saw him. A figure in a red coat, standing perfectly still in the snow. His face was shadowed, but I knew. It was Santa. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. They didn't believe me. Said it was the stress, the grief. But I knew better. Every year since then, the same thing happens. 3 knocks. Always on Christmas Eve. Always in the dead of night. When I look outside, he's there waiting. Danny's still out there. I don't know where or how, but he's out there. And Santa, he's just waiting for the right moment to take me too. You know, I used to love snow. Growing up, it was magical. Snow meant hot chocolate, sledding, and everything feeling quiet and clean. Even as an adult, snowstorms gave me this weird sense of calm. But now I can't see snow without this pit forming in my stomach. It's suffocating, like it's closing in, and it's all because of that night. It was a Friday, and they were calling it the storm of the decade. The kind of storm that has reporters standing knee-deep in snow on live TV, telling everyone to stay home. But I didn't have that luxury. I'd been stuck at work, finishing up inventory at the library. By the time I was done, the streets were already buried under thick layers of snow, and the wind had that high-pitched howl that makes it sound alive. My place wasn't far, just a 15-minute walk, and I figured, why not? Walking in the snow could be nice, maybe even peaceful. At first it was. The streets were deserted, like the whole city had gone into hiding. The snow swallowed every sound except for the crunch of my boots. Streetlights cast this warm, golden glow on everything, making the snow look soft and almost otherworldly. I pulled my scarf tighter around my face. The cold nipped at any skin I left exposed, and I kept moving, trying to enjoy the quiet. That's when I noticed him. At first, he was just a shadow, this figure moving through the swirling snow a few blocks back. Nothing unusual. Just someone else braving the storm, I thought. His pace was steady, not hurried, but no matter how far I walked, he stayed at the same distance. I told myself it was just a coincidence, that I was being paranoid. But you know how your gut sometimes knows things your brain hasn't caught up to yet? Yeah, that feeling started gnawing at me. I turned down another street, trying to shake the unease. When I glanced back, there he was, still there. Same distance, same steady pace. My heart started doing this uncomfortable pounding thing, and I sped up, hoping I was just imagining it. 3 blocks later, I saw the glowing sign of a little cafe, a total lifesaver. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The warmth hit me like a hug. There weren't many people. A tired-looking barista wiped down the counter, and a couple tucked away in a corner booth. I ordered tea, mostly to stall, and found a seat by the window where I could keep an eye on the street. He was still out there, standing across the street now, half hidden in the shadows of an alley. He wasn't looking at the cafe exactly, but he wasn't moving either. It felt deliberate. My stomach twisted. The barista broke through my thoughts with a cheerful, crazy night to be out, huh? I forced a smile. Yeah, just trying to get home. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I stayed in that cafe longer than I needed to, sipping my tea and glancing outside every few minutes, hoping he'd disappear. But when I finally worked up the nerve to leave, he was closer. On my side of the street now, leaning against a lamppost like he had all the time in the world. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. I didn't run, but I walked fast, heading down a side street. The snow was falling harder, making everything blurry and unfamiliar. The only sound was the crunch of my boots, and then his following behind me. I didn't dare look back. My breath was coming out in sharp little clouds, and I could feel my legs starting to ache, but I couldn't stop. I turned sharply, heading toward an apartment building I didn't recognize. The steps were covered in snow, and the front door was locked. I fumbled with my keys like I lived there, hoping he'd just pass by. But he didn't. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, standing there like he was waiting for something. "What do you want?" I yelled. My voice trembled more than I wanted it to. He didn't answer, didn't move, just tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. That was it. I bolted down the other side of the building. The snow swallowed the sound of my frantic footsteps. My lungs burned and the cold air stung every time I inhaled. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. Then, through the storm, I saw the warm glow of an open garage. It was a mechanic's shop, the kind that stays open no matter the weather. I practically fell inside, gasping for air. The workers stopped what they were doing, staring at me. "You okay?" One of them asked. "There's someone following me." I barely got the words out. "He's outside." They exchanged looks before stepping out into the storm. I stayed behind, trying to calm down. My whole body was shaking. After what felt like forever, they came back. "We didn't see anyone." One of them spoke. "Looks like he's gone." I wanted to believe them. They offered to let me stay until the storm eased up, but I felt like I was imposing. My apartment was close, and I convinced myself I could make it. I thanked them and stepped back into the freezing night. The streets were empty again, and for a moment, I thought I was in the clear. My apartment building came into view, and relief flooded through me. I practically ran up the steps, fumbling with my keys. The second I stepped inside, I locked the door behind me, feeling safe for the first time all night, and then I heard it. The faint creak of footsteps above me. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen anyone else come in. Slowly I looked up, and there he was, standing on the landing, staring down at me. I don't even remember running to my apartment, but I must have. I locked the door and shoved a chair under the knob. My hands shook as I called 911. The operator's calm voice didn't match the terror pounding through me. Then came the knock. Soft at first, then louder, more frantic. Then silence. The sound of splintering wood was what snapped me back. He was breaking down the door. The police showed up just in time, their flashing lights casting weird shadows through the snow. They tackled him just as he forced his way inside. His screams mixed with the howling wind, and I'll never forget the sound. That night changed everything for me. You know how some people just have to poke around where they don't belong? Yeah, that's me. Always has been. I blame it on curiosity. Reckless curiosity, to be honest. So when that snowstorm hit one winter, locking the whole town inside, I couldn't stop myself. There was this one house, frostburn house, that nobody dared to go near. And well, that just made it irresistible. The house sat on a hill at the edge of town. Even as a kid, it gave me the creeps. People said the wind howled louder around it, even on calm days. Others claimed it was cursed. People who went in never came back out. Every time I passed it, I'd stare at the dark windows and sagging roof, trying to imagine what could make a house feel evil. By the time I was 17, I was done imagining. I needed to see for myself. The storm that day was brutal. Thick, heavy snow blurred everything into a white haze. School was canceled. The streets were empty. The wind rattled windows like it was trying to get inside. Most people were smart enough to hunker down with hot chocolate and a good movie. Not me. When I told my cousin Jude what I was planning, he nearly choked on his marshmallow. "You want to go there? In this weather? Have you finally lost it? It's the perfect time." I insisted. "No one will see us. Besides, it's just a house." Jude wasn't buying it, but eventually my relentless nagging wore him down. He called Lyra his sort of girlfriend. I dragged along Theo, my overly cautious best friend. The four of us bundled up like explorers heading into the Arctic and trudged through the woods. Snow crunched under our boots. The wind clawed at our faces. It was only a mile to the house, but it felt like forever. When we got there, the house was worse than I remembered. The storm had half buried the ground floor. Icicles hung from the roof like jagged teeth. The windows were black voids. The whole thing seemed to sag under its own weight. Lyra snapped a photo with her phone, but her lens fogged up instantly. "Great," Theo muttered, shivering. "We made it to the creepiest place on earth. Can we leave now?" I didn't answer. My gloves were already on the warped door handle, tugging it open. The wind howled louder as it swung inward. Inside, it was even colder. Snow had crept through broken windows, leaving a thin layer of frost on the floors. The wallpaper peeled in long strips like skin. The air smelled damp and old, like a basement that had been left to rot. A grand staircase loomed in front of us. Its banister cracked and leaned. "This is charming," Jude said, his flashlight sweeping over the room. "Really cozy." We split up to explore, though Theo stuck to me like glue. The first room I peeked into might have been a living room once. Now it was just a wreck. Soot-blackened fireplace, snow-dusted furniture, and a rocking chair that creaked ever so slightly when the wind shifted. The dining room was worse. The table was still set, as if whoever lived here had just walked away mid-meal. Plates, forks, and even candlesticks sat in place, all coated in grime. The frost on the walls looked different here, thicker and oddly swirled, like someone had drawn intricate patterns into it. For a second, I thought I heard faint laughter echoing from somewhere, but when I turned, there was nothing. Just silence. Upstairs, things got weird. The air was colder, sharper. The floor groaned under our weight. The bedrooms were stripped bare. Rotting mattresses, cracked mirrors, closets full of moth-eaten clothes. Jude and Lyra hung back by a window, whispering about how they couldn't even see the woods through the storm. Theo stayed close to the staircase, ready to bolt. Then we heard it. A single loud thud from somewhere down the hall. What was that? Lyra whispered, gripping Jude's arm. We froze, listening. Another thud, then another. It sounded like heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching through the snow-covered hallway. There's no way anyone else is here, Theo said, his voice low and tight. Let's just go. Now. I wish I'd listened, but I didn't. Something about those sounds pulled me in, like the house itself was daring me to keep going. My flashlight flickered as I edged down the hallway, the others trailing behind me. The last door at the end of the hall creaked as I pushed it open. The room was freezing, even colder than the rest of the house. Frost spiraled out from one corner, thicker and darker, like it was growing. Crouched there, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. Small, still, almost childlike. For a second, I thought it was a kid. She wore a tattered dress, her arms wrapped around her knees. But when she turned to look at me, I saw nothing. No face, just smooth, pale skin where her features should have been. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. My flashlight slipped from my hands and hit the floor, the beam skittering across scratches on the wall. Words carved deep into the wood. Leave now. Don't come back. Behind me, Theo shouted my name. But before I could move, the door slammed shut. The figure stood, her movements sharp and unnatural. A deep voice, too deep, echoed through the room. You shouldn't have come. They found me minutes later, shoving the door open with a crack. I bolted past them into the hallway, shaking and barely able to speak. There's someone in there. I managed to gasp. A girl. But when we looked, the room was empty. The frost was gone. Only the scratches on the wall remained. None of us talked as we left the house, the storm swallowing our footsteps. Later, I found out the story. Decades ago, during a blizzard, a family got trapped in that house. The youngest daughter, Abigail, went missing. Some said she froze to death. Others whispered darker things. I don't know what happened to her. I don't want to. I haven't been back to Frostburn House since. It all started innocently enough. I just turned 18 and was back home for winter break. It was my first time away after starting college. Our family cabin sat tucked away at the edge of the woods, way off the main road. Snowplows didn't bother with our little slice of nowhere. That was kind of the charm. I loved how peaceful it was, even if it felt like the middle of nowhere. That night, though, the peace turned into something else entirely. The storm came in out of nowhere. One minute, the air was calm, crisp, and almost too still. The next, snow was flying sideways. The wind was a feral, screaming thing, clawing at the windows. My mom told me to stay inside. The cabin felt so stifling, and I've always been stubborn like that. I thought, what's the harm in a quick walk? I didn't even tell anyone I was going. I just slipped on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out into the storm. At first, it was beautiful. The snow was so clean, so fresh, covering everything like some kind of enchanted blanket. My flashlight caught on the flakes as they fell, making them sparkle like glitter. The path through the woods was familiar. I must have walked it 1,000 times as a kid. I figured I'd just loop down to the creek and back before anyone even noticed I was gone. But the storm wasn't playing around. Within minutes, the snow was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The wind made it hard to breathe. That's when I heard it. A bell. Not some cheery sleigh bell or the soft chime of a church in the distance. No, this was heavy, deliberate, and slow. The kind of sound that feels like it's not supposed to be there. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The wind was loud and sounds can play tricks on you. But then it came again, low and steady, like it was calling to me. My pulse kicked up. Who would be out here? Nobody lived near us, especially not in weather like this. I swung my flashlight around, squinting into the swirling snow, but there was nothing. just trees, white, and darkness. The bell rang again. Closer this time. I should have turned back. Honestly, I should have run. But there was something about the sound, something I can't really explain, that pulled me forward. Like I needed to know. I followed the path deeper into the woods, the snow crunching under my boots and the wind screaming in my ears. When I reached the clearing, I almost dropped my flashlight. The beam swept over the snow, and there they were. Animal carcasses. Rabbits, a fox, even a deer, all piled together in a neat circle. Their bodies were torn apart, blood frozen in dark patches on the snow. The smell hit me like a slap. It was sharp and sickly, even in the freezing air. Then I saw the footprints. They weren't mine. They were big, deep, and deliberate, leading away from the clearing into the trees. My stomach knotted as the bell rang again, this time so loud it made me jump. I whipped around and caught a glimpse of movement. A tall figure was slipping between the trees, just on the edge of my flashlight beam. He was holding something, a heavy iron bell, swinging it methodically as he walked. His coat billowed in the wind, and his face, I couldn't see his face under the hood. I yelled, trying to sound brave, but my voice cracked. He didn't respond. He just stood there, swaying slightly, the bell ringing again and again. I froze, my breath coming in sharp bursts. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. Then he started walking toward me. I ran. The snow was so deep it felt like wading through mud. Every step was a battle. The bell, God, that bell kept ringing behind me. Faster now, almost frantic. I didn't dare look back. My flashlight slipped from my hand, but I didn't stop to grab it. I just kept going, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. At one point I tripped, sprawling face first into the snow. When I scrambled up, I saw him again. Closer this time. His hood had slipped back, and his face, something about it wasn't right. It was too pale, too angular, like it didn't belong to a person. His eyes, they gleamed in the darkness, sharp and unnatural. When he smiled, I saw his teeth. They were too white, too perfect, too wrong. Then I heard it, my dad's voice calling my name. It cut through the storm like a knife, grounding me just enough to keep moving. I ran toward it, screaming back, desperate for him to find me. Finally, I saw the beam of his flashlight, and then his arms were around me, hauling me out of the snow. He's there, I gasped. He's still out there. My dad didn't say a word. He just held me tight, his own flashlight swinging back toward the trees. I heard it too. We didn't wait. He half dragged, half carried me back to the cabin, where my mom was already at the door, frantic and crying. Inside, they bundled me up in blankets while my dad grabbed his rifle and went back out to check. He didn't find anything. No footprints, no bell, no sign of anyone. The police came the next day, but the storm had wiped everything clean. They didn't believe me. They said it was probably exhaustion or a prank, but they didn't see the flashlight I lost. It was propped upright in the snow, like someone had left it there on purpose. To this day, I don't know what I saw or who. It was one of those nights you'd think no one in their right mind would step outside. The snowstorm had rolled in hours earlier than anyone expected. But there I was, pulling on my coat and boots, ignoring every instinct telling me to stay put. It all started with Mila. We'd matched on this app about a week ago. She had that kind of smile that just made you want to know what she was laughing about. Her dark, wavy hair framed her face perfectly. It was like one of those candid shots that feel too good to be real. But she was real. At least I thought she was. We'd been messaging nonstop. Voice notes, jokes, even a couple of goofy selfies. When she suggested meeting up, I couldn't say no, even with the storm. You sure about this? I asked over the phone, watching the snow whip past my window. She laughed. This warm, low sound somehow made me forget how cold it was outside. Come on, it's just a little snow. I've got wine, I've got heat. What more could you want? I hesitated, but only for a second. All right, I said. I'm on my way. Her place was across town in this old, slightly run-down building. You know the type. Brick walls with cracks big enough to swallow a quarter, windows that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years. I buzzed her flat. Her voice came through the intercom, cheerful and inviting, like we were old friends. When I walked in, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Sweet and spiced, like cinnamon and oranges. Candles flickered on every available surface, casting a cozy glow that made the storm outside feel a million miles away. She greeted me barefoot. Her cheeks were flushed like she'd just been sitting next to a roaring fire. She handed me a glass of wine before I'd even taken off my coat. Warm up. We spent hours talking. Honestly, it was easy. Too easy. She told me about her family, her dreams of traveling to places like Iceland and Morocco, the books she loved. I talked about myself more than I usually do. There was something about her that made me let my guard down. The storm raged outside. Inside, it felt safe, like nothing bad could touch us. By the time she opened another bottle, I wasn't thinking about much at all. I wasn't suspicious when she refilled my glass. I didn't even notice anything was wrong until my vision started to swim. At first, I thought I was just drunk. My head felt heavy. The room started spinning in slow, dizzying circles. Mila. I tried to say something, but my tongue felt thick, useless. She just smiled. Not warm this time. Something else. Something colder. Relax. She said softly. Just let it happen. The next thing I knew, I was freezing. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my hands and feet bound with some rough, scratchy rope. My face stung from the cold. Every muscle in my body ached. The room was dark now, except for a single candle on the table. Its flickering light barely cut through the shadows. I tried to move, to cry out, but my mouth was gagged. Panic hit me hard, like ice water dumped over my head. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode. And then I saw him. He stepped out of the shadows like he'd been waiting for me to wake up. A tall guy, broad shoulders, wearing a balaclava. His eyes were the only thing visible. They were cold and sharp, like he could see straight through me. You're going to listen. He crouched down beside me. His voice was calm, too calm, like he'd done this before. And you're going to do exactly what I say. Got it. I nodded, too scared to do anything else. He took my phone first, demanded the PIN. When I hesitated, he grabbed a fistful of my hair and pulled my head back hard enough to make me cry out. The knife in his other hand was so close I could see the scratches on the blade. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, he said. I gave him the code. What else could I do? He worked quickly, draining my bank accounts with a few swipes and taps. I just lay there, helpless, as my savings vanished in front of me. But he wasn't done. The camera came out next. I won't go into the details of what happened after that. I can't. Even now, just thinking about it makes my stomach turn. He took pictures, staged me in ways I never want to remember. Every click of the camera felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of just how powerless I was. When he was done, he crouched down again, so close I could feel his breath on my face. If you tell anyone, he said, his voice low and threatening. These pictures, they're going everywhere. Your family, your job, your friends. Understand? I nodded, tears streaming down my face as he packed up his things and walked out. Mila didn't come back. She didn't need to. It took hours to free myself. By the time I stumbled outside, the storm had mostly died down. The streets were eerily quiet. The snow crunched under my boots as I made my way home. For days, I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. I barely ate, barely slept. When my friend Jake finally showed up unannounced, he found me sitting on the couch, staring at the wall like a zombie. He made me tell him everything. He wanted me to go to the police, to fight back. But how could I? Those pictures were a leash. The fear of what they'd do if I talked kept me frozen. Jake tried to tell me it wasn't my fault, that I was the victim. They were the monsters. But the words didn't help. They still don't. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from that night. When I first moved into my new place, one of the things I loved most was how peaceful the neighborhood became in the winter. Once the snow started falling, everything felt muted, like the whole world was wrapped in a heavy blanket. It was quiet in a way that made my little apartment feel cozier, like my own private retreat. Honestly, living alone was great. No roommates leaving dishes in the sink. No awkward small talk in the hallways. Just me and my cat, Olive. Plus, with everything available at the push of a button, I didn't even need to leave the house. Groceries, books, my favorite sushi rolls, I could get it all delivered. Even when the streets turned into icy death traps during a snowstorm, I never worried. I was set. One Friday night, the snow was coming down hard. Like, don't even try to drive hard. I had no intention of going anywhere, though. My plan was simple. Curl up with Olive, binge watch my favorite show, and eat something warm and cheesy. So I ordered a pizza. The app said the driver, Ryan, would be there in about 30 minutes. I clicked on his profile, which had a picture of a guy in a red jacket. smiling like he just helped an old lady cross the street. The kind of guy you wouldn't expect to mind delivering pizzas in a blizzard. While I waited, I watched the snow pile up outside the window. It was almost hypnotic, the way the streetlights caught the flakes swirling in the wind. Olive sat on the windowsill, her tail flicking as she stared out like she was on neighborhood watch duty. 30 minutes passed, then 40. I wasn't too worried. Storms slow everything down. Then I got the notification. Ryan is approaching with your order. I muted the TV and listened for the usual sounds. The car pulling up, the crunch of boots on the porch. Sure enough, after a couple of minutes, I heard footsteps. But then, nothing. No knock. No thud of the pizza box on the welcome mat. Just silence. Apart from the wind rattling the windows. I got up and peeked through the peephole. My stomach did this weird little flip. Ryan was standing on the porch, holding the pizza box, but he wasn't moving. His hood was up, hiding most of his face, and he was just staring at the door, not knocking, not shivering, just standing there. I opened the app and typed a quick message. Hey, you can leave the pizza on the mat. Thanks. No response. He didn't even look at his phone. Instead, he shifted slightly, leaning closer to the door, like he was trying to listen for something. My skin prickled. Then my phone buzzed. I need you to come out and take it. I can't leave until you do. I stared at the message, my heart starting to race. I typed back, it's fine, you can leave it. I don't mind if it gets cold. His reply came immediately. No, you need to open the door. At this point, my hands were shaking. I double-checked the locks, then glanced back through the peephole. He hadn't moved, but something about the way he stood there felt wrong. Like he wasn't really waiting for me to open the door. Like he was waiting for something else. I sent one last message. If you don't leave, I'm going to report this. His response was chilling. That's fine. The wind howled louder, almost drowning out the faint sound of Olive hissing behind me. I couldn't tell if I was shaking from the cold or from something else entirely, but I backed away from the door, grabbing my phone. I dialed 911, my voice barely steady as I explained what was happening. The dispatcher promised they'd send someone, but with the storm, who knew how long it would take? I hung up and pressed my ear to the door, trying to hear if he was still there. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then a knock, loud and deliberate. Hey, he called out, his voice unnervingly calm. I just want to make sure you're okay. It's freezing out here. I didn't answer. My breath felt stuck in my throat, and Olive was now pressed against my leg, her fur standing on end. Another knock, harder this time. Come on, he said, his tone shifting into something darker. Just open the door for a second. I didn't dare move. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, I heard the crunch of footsteps retreating. I crept back to the peephole and saw him walking away, his figure fading into the snowstorm. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. But then I noticed something on the porch. A small black shape barely visible against the snow. When I worked up the nerve to open the door a crack, I saw it. A wallet. His wallet. I hesitated, then picked it up and stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. Inside the wallet, there was no ID, no cash. Just a piece of paper folded into quarters. 4 words were scrawled in shaky handwriting. Next time, no locks. The police never found him. It's funny how some people walk into your life and leave you questioning everything. Smokey was one of those people for me. The first time he showed up at my office, he brought the snowstorm in with him, literally. The wind was howling like it had something to prove. The snow was coming down so thick you could barely see across the street. He stood there in the doorway, stomping the slush off his boots. His shoulders were dusted in frost, like he just battled his way out of a blizzard. Rough out there, he said. It felt less like small talk and more like he just barely survived. Smokey wasn't your typical case. Most of the guys on my caseload came in with excuses ready. They acted like they were the victims of their own bad choices. But not him. He didn't try to explain himself or win me over. He just sat down across from me, quiet and calm, like he'd already made peace with whatever I thought of him. His file was a thick one, full of heavy words like organized crime and murder. Still, when he spoke, his voice was steady and low, like he'd learned a long time ago not to waste words. For months, he was steady as a clock. He held down his job at a garage, stayed out of trouble, and never missed a meeting. Our check-ins were routine, almost boring, but I couldn't help noticing there was more to him. He had this way about him, like someone who'd been through hell and come out on the other side, not unscathed but still standing. Then one afternoon, with the snow pounding against the windows, he did something out of character. He lingered at the door after our usual session, hands in his coat pockets, like he had something on his mind. "You ever wonder how a guy ends up like me?" he asked. His voice was nearly lost in the sound of the wind. I paused, not sure where he was going with this. "Yeah, I guess I do." He nodded, like he'd been expecting that. "All right," he said, settling back into the chair, "I'll tell you, but don't say I didn't warn you. It's not a pretty story." Smokey said it started on a night just like that one. Back in the late 80s, he was working for a narcotics ring that operated up and down the coast. He'd started as muscle, just a guy they sent to lean on people who owed money. But over time, the bosses trusted him with bigger jobs. These were the kind that came with darker consequences. That night, his boss handed him a job he didn't want. A kid they called Babyface, a recruit barely old enough to shave, had gone missing for a day. The bosses decided he was a snitch. Smokey's orders were clear. Make sure the kid didn't talk. Refusing wasn't an option, Smokey said. His gaze was fixed somewhere far away. Not if I wanted to keep breathing. So, he set it up. He told the kid there was a special job out in the woods. Babyface showed up, smiling and eager, snowflakes sticking to his hair. Smokey drove them out of town. The car slipped on icy roads, the headlights cutting through the storm. By the time they reached the woods, the snow was up to their knees. Smokey handed Babyface a shovel and told him to dig. It didn't take long for the kid to figure it out. The shovel slipped from his hands. He started begging. He was full on pleading for his life. He told Smokey his mom was sick, that she'd die without him around to take care of her. Smokey could have pulled the trigger right there, ended it, and gone back to town. But something about the kid's desperation clawed at him. "So I told him to run," Smokey said, rubbing his hands together as if the memory made them cold. "Told him not to stop until he was someplace no one knew his name." And Babyface ran. Smokey stayed behind in the snow, gun in hand, wondering if he'd just signed his own death warrant. A week later, the kid's body turned up in a ditch. Smokey's boss was furious. He accused Smokey of screwing up the job. To prove his loyalty, they sent him back out with 2 enforcers to dig up the grave and look for evidence of a wiretap or tracking device. "They didn't trust me," Smokey said, shaking his head. "And I knew they'd kill me if they didn't find what they were looking for." The storm that night was even worse. The wind howled like a living thing. The snow stung his face like tiny needles. For hours, the enforcers dug through the frozen ground. Their tempers wore thin. Smokey could feel the tension building. He was sure they'd turn on him. Then, out of nowhere, a shout cut through the storm. Flashlights. Deputies. Someone had tipped them off about suspicious activity in the area. The enforcers opened fire, but the deputies were ready. In the chaos, Smokey caught a bullet in the leg. When the dust settled, the enforcers were dead, and Smokey managed to convince the deputies he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. His boss wasn't so easily fooled. Smokey fled town, but they came for him a few weeks later. One of the enforcers tracked him down. Smokey didn't give him the chance to finish the job. The cops caught him not long after, and that was it. 35 years behind bars. "Do I regret it?" Smokey asked. His voice was barely audible over the wind outside. "Maybe. Sparing that kid cost me everything. But I'd do it again." Somebody had to show him a little mercy. He stood up, pulling his coat tight against the storm. Anyway, that's the story. Figured it was worth telling. Smokey finished his parole a few months later. I never saw him again. But sometimes on nights when the wind howls and the snow piles high against the windows, I think about him. He always said he wasn't a good man. But maybe, just for that one moment, he was the best man he could be. When I first moved to the city, it felt like trying to fit a puzzle piece into the wrong spot. Nothing lined up. The streets were too wide, the air too sharp. Everyone seemed to be in a rush to get somewhere I couldn't even begin to imagine. But I told myself I'd make it work. Somehow, a couple of weeks in, I stumbled upon this little bar at the end of a crooked alley. The wooden sign above the door was worn and half buried under a thick layer of snow. There was this warm, golden light spilling out onto the cobblestones. It felt inviting, like it was calling me in. The moment I pushed open the door, I was wrapped in warmth. It was the kind of place that felt like it had been there forever. Thick oak beams overhead, leather stools that had seen better days, a fireplace glowing at one end. The air smelled faintly of whiskey and pine, like an old story you wanted to hear again. I ordered a drink and sat by the fire, letting myself sink into the moment. That was the beginning of something I hadn't expected. A routine that became my anchor in a city that otherwise felt so unsteady. I started going there regularly. Over time, I got to know the people who made the place feel alive. That's how I met Theo. It was a couple of months after I'd started coming around. Theo, well, he was impossible to miss. He had this laugh that could fill a room. It rolled out like thunder and made you want to laugh too, even if you didn't catch the joke. He talked with his hands. His stories practically leaped into the air as he gestured. We hit it off right away. Before I knew it, Theo became part of my evenings at the bar. Honestly, it made the city start to feel a little less lonely. Winter was brutal. The snow came early and just kept piling up. The kind of cold that bites straight through your coat. But the bar, it was always open. The fire always burned. The drinks were always warm. It felt like a bubble untouched by the chaos outside. One night, during one of those relentless blizzards, everything changed. Theo and I had been there for a while, just talking about nothing in particular. The place was lively, full of familiar faces. But there was one person who stood out. Eric. Eric was one of the old-timers. The kind of guy who always sat alone and watched everything. He had this way of being silent that made the air feel heavy around him. He'd been coming to the bar for years, long before people like Theo or me showed up. Though he never outright said it, you could tell he didn't like the way things had changed. Theo, with his loud laugh and easy charm, was everything Eric seemed to resent. That night, you could feel the tension. Theo, being Theo, tried to smooth things over. He even offered to buy Eric a drink. But Eric just shook his head, grumbled something under his breath. Theo laughed it off like he always did, but I could tell it bothered him a little. Still, he didn't let it ruin the mood. The snow was coming down hard when Theo got up to use the bathroom. The door swung shut behind him. I didn't think much of it, but 10 minutes passed, then 15. He still hadn't come back. I started to feel uneasy. I got up and walked toward the back hallway. The bathroom door was slightly open, creaking softly on its hinges. "Theo?" I called out. My voice barely carried over the muffled howl of the wind outside. Then I saw him. He was slumped against the wall, his shirt stained a deep spreading red. For a second, it was like time froze. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Then my body moved on its own. I dropped to my knees beside him, pressing my hands against the wound below his ribs. "Theo, hang on, just hang on." My voice cracked, barely above a whisper, as if shouting might make it worse. Theo's eyes fluttered open. He gave me this faint, lopsided smile. "Guess Eric didn't like my joke about the snow," he said. His voice was strained, somehow still carrying that familiar humor. I turned my head and saw the knife on the floor. The blade slick with blood. The back door was wide open. Snow swirled in and dusted the floor in a thin white layer. Eric was gone. Everything after that blurred together. Someone called an ambulance. The storm had practically shut the city down. It felt like forever before help arrived. By the time the paramedics got there, Theo was barely holding on. They rushed him out into the blizzard. I stood there in the cold, his blood still on my hands, watching the ambulance disappear into the storm. Theo didn't make it. The storm had slowed the ambulance just enough to steal his chances. When the news came the next morning, the whole bar felt it. It was like a shadow had fallen over the place. Everyone had their own theories about Eric. Some said he'd snapped. Others that he'd been looking for a reason to lash out. 2 days later, they found his car buried in snow on the outskirts of town. He hadn't made it through the storm either. Theo's funeral was quiet. The kind of gathering where people barely speak because there's just nothing to say. The bar closed for the day. Almost everyone who'd ever known him showed up. I stood there, watching the snow fall gently over the rows of headstones. It felt like the city had never been colder. I still go to the bar sometimes, but it's different now. His laugh doesn't echo through the room anymore. His favorite stool by the fire stays empty. The storms have come and gone. That night is still there like a scar the bar carries in its walls. I keep a small sketch of him tucked in my coat pocket, something a friend had drawn months before that night. It's my way of holding on to the light he brought, even on the darkest, coldest nights. You ever have one of those days where you're like, this is a bad idea, but you do it anyway? Yeah, that was me the day the snowstorm hit. I mean, I'd been warned about how winters up north could be brutal. But this storm, it was something else. The kind of cold that slices right through you, no matter how many layers you've got on. Everything was eerily quiet outside too, like the snow had swallowed all the sound. Even the usual city noise was gone. That was my first day at Northridge Logistics, this massive company everyone in town seemed to know about. My fiancé even tried to talk me out of going. He handed me a thermos of coffee and said, just start tomorrow. No job is worth braving this mess. But I couldn't. This wasn't just any job, it was the job. The one that was going to get us out of the financial hole we'd been stuck in for way too long. So, I bundled up, caught the last bus still running, and made my way to this giant concrete fortress of a building. It looked more like a bunker than an office. When I got to the lobby, it was buzzing. A handful of new hires were clustered near the reception desk, brushing snow off their coats. And then there was this guy standing off to the side. His coat was open, in that freezing cold. He had this way of watching the room, like he was cataloging everything. His name tag said Ryan. He didn't say much during orientation, just nodded every now and then and cracked this joke that landed like a lead balloon. I tried to brush it off, but something about him felt off, not in a loud, obvious way. It was the kind of off that creeps up on you when you're not paying attention, you know? When they split us into groups for the tour, Ryan ended up in mine. The storm had knocked out power in parts of the building, so some hallways were dim, with just the emergency lights flickering. Creepy enough on its own. But Ryan, he seemed weirdly into it. His eyes kept darting to the dark corners like he was looking for something, or someone. At one point, he leaned toward me and said, "Kind of eerie, isn't it? A place like this. It'd be so easy to disappear." I laughed it off. What else was I supposed to do? And made sure to stick close to the trainer after that. By the end of the day, the storm had only gotten worse. As I headed toward the exit, Ryan appeared next to me like he'd been waiting. "You got a ride?" he asked. Real casual, like we were old friends. Evan was already outside in the car, heater blasting. So I just said, "Yeah, I'm good. Thanks." He nodded. But the way he lingered for a second too long made my skin crawl. That night, as the snow piled up against the windows, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. It was Ryan. He started off harmless, sent me a meme, commented about the storm. But then he asked if I wanted to grab a drink. Before I could respond, he sent a photo of the building, buried in snow. He said he stayed late to explore. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, the storm was still raging. During our first break, I stepped outside to clear my head. The smoking area was covered in fresh snow. The air was sharp and clean. I thought I'd finally have a moment to myself. But no, Ryan showed up. "Mind if I join?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. He sat too close, way too close. Then he grabbed my lighter without asking, flicked it a few times, and started scrolling through his phone. "Check this out," he said, showing me a picture of himself shirtless. Marine days. I mumbled something polite and got up to leave, but he grabbed my arm. Not hard, but enough to make my heart race. "Hey," he said, smiling in this way that wasn't friendly. "Relax." Over the next few days, it just got worse. He'd hover while I worked, step into my space like he didn't know what personal boundaries were, and make these weird comments that sounded like compliments but weren't. Then there were the drawings. Explicit, creepy sketches of things that felt way too personal. The worst one was a drawing of a woman who looked exactly like me. He'd left it in my locker. That was the breaking point. One night, as I was grabbing my coat, he cornered me in the hallway. The lights were dim. The storm outside made the building feel even more isolated. He leaned in close and said, "You don't have to be so uptight. We could have fun." I don't know where I found the courage, but I snapped. "Leave me alone, Ryan." He just laughed. "You'll miss me when I'm gone." The next morning, I reported him to HR. It was a long, drawn-out process, weeks of paperwork and meetings while he kept finding ways to make my life hell. He'd corner me in the break room, whisper things that made my stomach churn. Once, he grabbed my wrist and said, "You should smile more." When they finally fired him, I felt relief. But it didn't last. A week later, I started getting friend requests from fake accounts. The usernames were too similar to be random. Even after the snow melted and spring came, I couldn't shake the chill he left behind. Now, every time I see snow start to fall, I think about Ryan, about how easy it is for someone to hide behind a quiet demeanor. And honestly, I hope I never see him or another storm like that ever again. Don't forget to check out these videos. Thanks for watching.